Hi everybody, and welcome to Haiku with Bukasaya Shigawa, and welcome to my studio. I'm coming to you from the subarctic interior of Alaska, in a town called Fairbanks. This channel is going to be all about haiku poetry, tanka, senu, and haiga. So welcome, I hope you enjoy. Number 253, Black Frog, the old pond, fall leaves into young waters as time goes by. This is what's called a honkadori. A honkadori is kind of akin to what in the Western world we call sampling. Every jazz musician, almost any genre of music does the cover, their version of another person's original or classic version of a song. And that's what we do in haiku. There's a poem by the poet Basho, the most famous haiku poet. And that's about a frog jumping into the water. And this is one of my versions, my hunkadories of that poem. So that's where it comes in. There's a frog, there's a pond, there's water, and I'll read the original later on so you can kind of compare and contrast, and I'll read it again. Okay, so here's an example again of that floating template. We have short, long, short, 5, 7, 4. And the next two poems I'm going to show you, translations of Basho's, are by Alan Watts first, and then an old colleague of mine, Jane Reichold, who's passed away. I think was the finest American haiku English language poet. And the first one, you've got a short, long, short, 3, 4, 1 syllable count with Watts. And remember I said about that floating template, notice how there's a lot shorter, a lot more succinct than the kind of antiquated 5, 7, 5 that we hear of. And then you have Jane Reichold, who's basically sets the standard for English haiku poets. And hers is 2, 4, 5. So short, long, short. But look how small that is. 2 syllables, 4 syllables, 5. And I'm sorry, it's not short, long, short. It's short, short, long. So there's an example of that floating template, how it can change from long, long, short, 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 long, and much more concise in their syllable count. And I just thought that people would see that as an interesting example. And you've got Alan's his translation, the old pond. A frog jumps in. Plop. Notice all three of us all use old pond. And then all three of us also speak of a frog. They both speak of jumping. Alan speaks of plopping. Jane speaks of the sound of water. I speak of fall leaving into young waters, and I also talk about the waters being young. So I'm talking about the waters being young and the pond being old. So it's interesting how we all change our covers, our interpretations, our sampling, our honkadori of this poem. I'm also talking about, when I talk about the pond and young waters, fall leaves into young waters. So I'm also speaking of a season ending. Am I talking about leaves on a tree, or am I talking about fall? The subject is leaving, exiting. And now we go into that season, into another season, which is represented by young waters. So young waters have a very specific kigo, seasonal word in haiku. So that's kind of my interpretation. Mine's a lot more wordy. Jane's is very precise, concise. very efficient. Mine's more long-winded. I hope you enjoyed this.